Welcome to another episode of Inside CKP. I am your host, Jeremy Como. Joining me today is JP Chandler. And before we introduce him, I'm going to go ahead and get the business out of the way and pay the bills. So this show is brought to you by Chris Kennedy Publishing, of course. You go there for all of your military sci-fi, fantasy, post-apocalyptic, and many other genre needs. Of course, if you want to support CKP and this channel, you can do so by going to Patreon for Chris Kennedy 110. Of course, in addition to chriskennedypublishing.com, you can find everything on Amazon. There are links on the website to these Amazon links for the books, and of course, getting news on Facebook, as well as news and shenanigans on the factory floor for now. But if you want the latest and greatest news, go to chriskennedypublishing.com and sign up for their newsletter. Now that the bills are paid, do you prefer James, Jimmy?
Just call me James.
James. All right. So, James, where can people find you?
Okay. First, I think Facebook is probably the easiest place to find me. You can find me at Chandler J. My author page is JP Chandler. That's the writer name I use, obviously. You can also find me on my website at funfictionstories.com. You can read about my books. I post some blogs every once in a while. I'm not super committed to the website, but I love it. So I do post stuff up on there, and I do have a newsletter. I send stuff out about once every 6 months. So that's fun. And you can follow me on Twitter and Instagram, although I don't. Mostly on Twitter. It's a nice distraction. Instagram, I like to post pretty pictures once in a while. So.
Awesome. And speaking of your newsletter, I put in the description of the video that we're going to talk about a giveaway that you're doing on your website. So go ahead and talk about that.
So I am running a sweepstakes or drawing or whatever you want to call it. If you sign up for my website for the newsletter, I'm giving away free copies, signed copies of all 3 of my novels in the Princess Saga. So
awesome.
And they'll be mailed to you and everything.
You're going to sign them and everything, right?
I'm going to sign and everything, yeah.
Everything. All right. Well, that's awesome. So you heard it here. And I'm going to encourage, and I say this just about every episode, if you like an author, you like a publisher, or anybody in entertainment, sign up for their newsletter. It's how you get the latest, greatest news on what they're doing. And also you get free stuff. So that's always a good deal. And with Chris Kennedy Publishing, you can actually potentially become a pre-reader. It's not a guarantee, but there you go. All right. Now all the business is out of the way. And James is new to the show, not new to CKP, but he's new to the show, first time on. So thank you for coming on. And we're here for a very specific reason, and it is to celebrate a new book that you have coming out. And so if you would, just give us we're going to get in more depth, but what's the brief elevator pitch for the latest book?
The brief elevator pitch is it's called Children of the Fall, and it is the 3rd book in what we're casually calling the Princess Saga. It is the 3rd book about Kelly Ansen and her family and friends. And you get to see I don't want to say the wrap up, the end of this cycle of the story, which is really exciting. And
this, just so people know, like you were saying, this is a series with this character, and this is the 3rd in the series. And this book is coming out tomorrow now. So we don't have the link for it yet, but I will be putting the link for the book in the show notes, and I'll be posting it on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter and all that once the link is out tomorrow. And but while you're waiting, go buy the other 2 books. So
Yeah, the link should be live at midnight. So as soon as you post it, people should be able to get the book.
Awesome.
So Princess, they call me Princess. The first of the three books is out in audio, and the presentation for that book is one of the best audiobooks I've ever heard. It does a great performance, uh, as well as an amazing story as well. But
Mhm. Now these three books are take place within a larger universe.
yeah, they're part of the Fallen World universe, which was created by Christopher Woods,
Hmm.
and expanded by Chris Kennedy. Uh, Together, they've put together a really interesting series of stories, and they've brought in some really excellent authors to. For me, it gave me a boost. It gave me the chance to really show what I can do as a writer. Um,
Hmm.
and But it's a great world. I like to compare it. My comparison is it's a little bit like a cross between Blade Runner and Mad Max, um,
Hmm.
because you have both a post-apocalyptic aspect of it, but you also have the cyberpunk aspect of it as well, and so which makes it a very very interesting situation where you've got this world of incredible technology that has fallen, and now you have people surviving and trying to create this new world for themselves.
That's awesome. So let's get to learn a little bit more about you because I met you at conventions and I can't
Mhm.
remember what the first convention I met you at. But what when did you know that you have you always been a writer or is this a later in life thing? When did you know that you wanted to become a writer?
I, I I knew I wanted to become a writer when I was 14. I don't remember exactly the sequence of events, but I remember reading. I loved fantasy and science fiction, and I remember there was sort of a I don't know, it was sort of there was a spot when I couldn't find a lot to read that I really wanted to. It was like just sort of a lull in the industry. I'd read, uh, the Lord of the Rings and the Elfstone series and a lot of other stuff like that. And so I was a little bit on the bored side trying to find something to read, but also I decided, you know what, I can probably do that. So I can probably write stories too. So I sat down and started writing stories. Um, and that's kind of where it started. And when I showed people what I could write, they usually liked it. And yes, it was my mom and my sisters, but they said it was good. So,
Hmm.
um, but yeah, I followed that pursuit into really excelling in English class and writing in general. Um, where I would, I just, I have an early memory when I was in when I was a freshman in high school. I was brand new to this high school, which I don't ever recommend. If your parents out there, never move at the beginning of a freshman year. Just don't do it. But so I started the school freshman year, didn't know anybody. So and they gave a creative writing uh, assignment, and
Hmm.
it was great. We had we had a really terrific English department in high school, but this lady gave a creative writing assignment, and I that was right up my alley. And I wrote a story, and so I remember to me I knew it was kind of silly at the time, but what really the crux of the story is basically she went to read some of the stories in front of in front of the class, and she said, "Well, you're all at a disadvantage because I read James's story first." And
Nah.
I thought, yeah, that's a good way to embarrass the new kid, but it
Hmm.
also felt pretty good. It's like, oh, she liked it. So, um, yeah, and I've just really loved writing stories ever since. Short stories. I've always wanted to be a novelist.
Hmm.
That was really kind of my goal. And when you go to when you study writing in high school and college, they really focus on the short story because that's what the professors and teachers have time to read.
Hmm.
So I really did learn how to write short stories really well. But I've always wanted to be a novelist. That's what I wanted to do. I didn't want to. I write some short stories and I'm pretty decent at it. But novels are where long stories is where I want to be.
Okay. So did you do now in college? Did you get to do much writing or?
Yeah, I decided to follow for. I went for an English degree. I was originally going to be a teacher at one point.
Mhm.
So I studied English, wanting to be a writer. And let me tell you, getting an English degree is not the best way to become a writer. Either it's going to turn you off of writing, or it's going to make you such an average writer that nobody's going to want to read your stuff. That's not true with all English majors, but yeah, it's. I would highly recommend that you go live your life and learn to write through other avenues. So.
Well, and my lovely wife, I think would agree with it because she's an English major. Uh,
Mhm.
but she did a lot of writing outside of school. She did fan
Mhm.
fiction and things like that. And I think she would agree because there are good teachers and there are bad teachers, and there are a lot of teachers that will suck the fun out of writing. And so yeah, I get what you're saying. So,
Yeah,
but
and especially if you like science fiction and fantasy,
mhm,
um, there was one I remember that, one of my higher level creative writing classes. There was one other person who liked fantasy and stuff, and we were the ghetto of the class. It was really weird, you know. Yeah, and nobody else really cared what we had to write.
well, because they're talking about literature and
Mhm.
the history of literature and things like that, and it's yeah, that's boring.
Well, I'll tell you, and what I'll never forget one of the stories that was best received in my class. I mean, everybody seemed to like it. Was the most boring story I've ever written, and it was nothing happened in it. It was, I mean, I'm sure the prose was fine, but nothing happened. But everybody loved it, so okay, whatever.
Well, that and they're sticking to grammar, which grammar is important,
Right? Yeah.
but grammar's only as important as a story is a good story, because grammar ain't gonna sell no books.
Yeah.
um,
No, yeah. There's, in fact, there. I could go farther and say writing style doesn't sell books at all.
mhm,
People don't, unless you're in an English major or you're in an English department. Nobody cares how well you craft a sentence. I mean,
mhm,
people are going to notice if you craft a bad sentence, but they're not going to. They don't care if you craft an amazing sentence when all they want to do is sit down and have a read in the shade or something. It just
mhm.
doesn't happen. Um,
Okay, so did you end up with the English degree, or did
Yeah,
you go?
well, yeah, I got my English degree, and I was gonna. So the story goes that I was gonna be a teacher, and then I got divorced from my first wife, and
Mhm,
I was kind of floating around trying to figure out what to do, and then I started looking at the economics of being a teacher, and decided, yeah, that is just not for me at all.
mhm,
And because in California, at least, I would have had at least another year, possibly a year and a half of school, and I would have had to borrow money to do it. So I decided I would look into going into law school. So I took the LSAT and scored pretty well, and started applying for schools and got in. So I went and got my law degree. And that was I'm not going to say it was a mistake, but it was. I did it for all the wrong reasons. So I practiced law for many years, and pretty much hated every minute of it.
yeah.
So yeah, I would never recommend that as a career choice.
So with the writing, did was it a straight line and you continued writing, or were there some bumps along the way, or?
That was part of the problem with the law degree in practicing law. Is the whole time I was doing it, I still wanted to write, and I was always being pulled in that other direction. So when I left the practice and went to look for other avenues, I that's when I started writing a little bit more. Um, because being a lawyer, I wrote all the time, but it was legal stuff. And so
Hmm.
so I have a pretty good command of the language. I can tell you that.
Hmm.
But then around, I don't know, 2016, 2017, I really felt I needed to get started, but I honestly didn't have the confidence, frankly.
Hmm.
Um, And then Chris Kennedy put out an open call for stories for a 4HU anthology. Sorry, and that's for anyone who doesn't know, that's the Four Horsemen universe. And I went ahead and submitted one, and I don't think it's my best story ever, but it got me in. I got into the anthology, and people really liked it, and so it was just enough to give me the confidence to really go for it. So I started communicating with Chris, and I was actually going to work on. I was working for a while on a 4HU novel that ended up not happening, and that's okay. I didn't. I don't think it would have been as good as I thought it was. But then the Fallen World came along, and there was this. And they put on an open call for a Fallen World anthology, and so I decided I'd throw my hat in the ring. And as Chris Kennedy likes to do with his anthologies, he wants to hear a summary of the story. He wants to hear, okay, what have you got? And then, because if it's completely off base, he doesn't want you to waste your time, which I love that aspect of the way Chris does business. He's not going to let you spend, a million hours writing a story that he's just going to reject because of the premise is bad. So I was going to apply for. I was going to write this story for the anthology, and I missed the cutoff. But I came up with this idea, and so I pitched it to him and thought, okay, next time. And my pitch was, in the next anthology, I want to write this story. What do you think? And the response was, well, basically, can you do it as a long book? Because I started out with the story about. Well, let me back up a minute. In the first anthology, Briscoe Woods wrote a story called Spec Shay, a very well-written story, a really creative take, and he established some basic canon issue points in that story that really made me start thinking. And one of them was this idea that the evil corporation Teledyne, as opposed to the evil corporation Obsidian, Teledyne got a lot of its specialists from prisons. They weren't volunteers. They were recruited or voluntold, and they and they actually had some pretty significant conditioning and whatever. They weren't volunteers, and they weren't willing guinea pigs either. They were basically forced to do it, and they did what they were told. There were some volunteers, some who agreed to it. But that was an interesting idea to me, that they would be recruiting from prisons. And that's where my first idea started. And that first idea actually turned into the prologue of They Call Me Princess, of basically it was an Obsidian agent who was investigating this idea of, what are they doing with these prisoners and how are they doing it? And can we interfere with it? And it grew from there. And then I had this idea of him rescuing a couple of kids, and the rest is in the books. But so I had this idea, and I pitched it to Chris, and he says, "Yeah, write me a book." And so, okay, I'll go write a book. And so I did. And it took several months and a lot of false starts and backing up and going back over, and eventually it came together as a whole book, and I'm pretty happy with the way it came out.
So, speaking of now, Chris Kennedy Publishing is on the East Coast, and you're on the West Coast.
So I'm on the West Coast.
So
there's the sun setting right now.
Yeah. So how did you? It was just like, were you a fan of CKP already, or?
So I was. I first started following Mark Wandry. Actually, I met. We kind of ran across each other on Facebook. He was a writer. I was a writer. He was publishing some stuff independently at the time, and I liked his attitude about some things, and I liked his approach to writing. And I read some of his books, and he's a fantastic author. I think people don't realize what a good writer he is, because he's such a good storyteller. I don't think they realize what a good writer he is.
Mm-hmm.
So I remember, I can actually remember the Facebook threads where the Four Horsemen universe was born. So so that when that happened, that's where I learned about Chris Kennedy and started following that. And so I just was following the story through Facebook mostly. And then that's when I decided to throw my hat in the ring, was just seeing what was going on. It's like, yeah, I may be on the wrong coast, but I can write. It's the internet age. We don't have to be, close to each other to get stuff done.
So they just did an open call on Facebook.
Yeah. Well, they did a post. I think, I don't remember exactly where it was, saying, hey, if you're interested, let us know. You tell us what your idea is. So I threw my hat in the ring. It wasn't the first of the 4HU anthologies. It was probably I think it was the third or fourth, actually. And so it was, and I don't know if it was the first open call even. It was the first one I had the guts to try for.
Well, we're glad you did. Speaking of anthologies, these are the three anthologies that you've been in, and but you also write fantasy.
Yes. Yeah, fantasy was one of my first loves. I've always wanted to write an epic fantasy along the lines of Lord of the Rings, or The Wheel of Time, or something like that. That's always. I remember meeting The Wheel of Time for the first time back during the first book, which is actually pretty good compared to most of the others. So it was, and just thinking, oh, look, they're still publishing this stuff. Why not? I can do that. I think I can do that. And so I've always wanted to write a big epic fantasy. I've got, so many, like many fantasy authors, I've got an epic fantasy sort of in my trunk that I pick at once in a while. I wanted to see the light of day one of these days, but it's a long way from finished. So I've been distracted.
Well, and that's what I find. The epic fantasies, you're basically, I mean, in most fictional books, you're creating a world, but like in urban fantasy, you have the benefit of writing within a world that people know already, like Chicago, or New York, or something like that. But in epic fantasy, you're creating everything. You're creating a government, society, money, people, places, all that stuff. And I could see that taking a little bit.
Well, it is, and it can be a little daunting. And I think the problem a lot of people get into is, and this is me for a long time, was trying to figure everything out, how everything worked, how the economy worked, and how the magic system would work, and things like that. And when you talk to fantasy writers, it turns out most of us actually just create just enough to tell the story. And so much of, just as one example, so much of Star Wars and the Star Wars universe actually didn't come from George Lucas. It came from Timothy Zahn and the other expanded universe writers and fan fiction that blew up from later on. It was, they told just enough to tell the stories. And well, when you have that many people adding just enough to tell the stories, eventually you have a pretty big world. And to a degree, that's what's happened with the Fallen world as well. We've got a pretty firm set of rules, but we're allowed to do a lot of stuff on our own. And the point about being able to identify the places where things are happening is a lot of fun. I mean, you can go to Google Maps and you can pinpoint where things are happening, and you can pull up Street View and see what's going on. The Princess Saga books happen up in Humboldt County, California, which is basically the weed capital of California, but it's a really nice place too. And I've got family up there, so I knew the area already. I didn't have to go to Google Maps to figure out what was what, but I used it as a reference to remind, as far as figuring what was possible as far as travel and things like that. And it's a lot of fun to do. I think it was Alex Raff tells a story about, well, Chris Woods nuked the city he was going to ride in, and so he had to go to Toronto, and he had to write his story in Toronto instead. So, yeah, the other stories in the Fallen World are really, really terrific. I think Casey Moore's is the most recent addition to the Fallen World. I know there are a few others who have been in the anthologies. This was the most recent novel put out. And yeah, there's some really, really great writing in the Fallen World series overall. I I write my little section, and everyone else writes their little sections, but they all have these common consistencies that help tie them all together.
Yeah, Marisa. Oops, accidental nuking. Yeah, that happens. So, so Fallen World is what it sounds like. It's post-apocalyptic.
Mm-hmm.
And so how many books in the universe do you know?
I think mine is going to be 19 or 20. I think the Children of the Fall is going to be the 19th or 20th book. Okay. And I don't know what happens after that. I haven't heard, actually.
So can people read your books not having read the rest of Fallen World?
Yes. You can read the Princess books without having to read the other novels. In fact, and I've got a short story from the same setting in was it Among the Embers.
Mm-hmm.
But you don't have to read it either to understand what's going on in the Princess stories. But that's also true with the other novels. There are very few that you need to read to really read the others. That's they mostly stand on their own with some slight exceptions, but even those that have strong connections to other works, really you can there's enough in them to catch up to what's going on.
Okay.
So, I mean, it's fun to read them all. Don't get me wrong. And my sister, actually, one of my sisters still hasn't read. She took the longest time before she read They Call Me Princess, because she was reading all the other books first, and so she's like, "I'm not there yet." Okay.
So, but that's good to know, because some people get scared when they see a 20-book series. You know, not everybody, because a lot of the CKP fans will read absolutely everything.
Yeah.
But it's good to know that if they like you and they like what you write, that they can just jump into that and then catch up on everything later. But
I'd be happy for people to start with Princess and then go read all the others.
All right, folks, you heard it. You got homework. So you write fantasy, you write post-apocalyptic science fiction. What, I know it's like picking your children. What do you like better, or in different ways, or what have you?
Yeah, it's really hard because it depends on what I'm wanting to do at the time. I really enjoy both fantasy and science fiction for a variety of reasons. I think on the fantasy side, there's a level of creativity and whimsy, I think, that you can engage in that you can't as well in science fiction. When science fiction writing gets a little too whimsical, you lose the readers, because they want rules, they want explanations for what's going on. And if it's just the author waving his hand and making things happen, that doesn't really work for a lot of science fiction readers. And I know that you still see it in science fiction once in a while, but at the same time, it often undermines otherwise better works. And so I really like the rules that you have to use in science fiction, as far as there has to be some science. There, you want a sense of wonder, but there also needs to be some sort of science foundation for it, even if it's science fantasy. As long as the science fantasy works and you're following those rules, you're there. You're still in the realm of science fiction. Fantasy, you can be a little more whimsical. You can be a little, you can have 300-foot long flying dragons if you want.
Mm-hmm.
If that's your thing, or you can have 8-foot long flying dragons.
Well, I don't know if you caught the dragon episode where people got a little passionate about their favorite dragons.
I didn't catch the episode until later, and I saw some interesting. That was an interesting exchange.
Yeah. Well, there's gonna be more. That was a good episode. I think we're gonna do that one again. And if you want to throw your hat in, you're welcome. But I think debates like that are pretty fun because of course Nick Stevenson has very strong opinions about I forget the words he used, space noodles or something like that.
I know that's honestly, those types of discussions are probably 50% of the fun of being a fan of science fiction and fantasy.
Mm-hmm.
Just exploring those ideas together. And are Pern dragons real dragons? Come on, not really. They're sort of imitation dragons, but but honestly, I guess one of the things one thing I was going to say, one thing I like about science fiction is, there is an aspect of science fiction that lends itself to discussing things like public policy, and I know, which sounds a little weird, but you see it all the time in science fiction, actual concepts of what might or might not work with regard to international relations or law and order and things like that. And with my background, those are an interest to me. I find those really fascinating. The idea of, okay, well, you have two species meet and they need to figure out how to get along or to not get along, and how does that work? Is there or how does a society raise itself from the ashes of a nuclear war? How do you decide who's in charge, or do you decide, or is it just the guy with the biggest gun? How do you keep yourself from being? How do people keep from being exploited, or do they? That kind of thing. Those are great topics, great themes in books that are really fun to explore. Whereas in fantasy, I think you really explore personalities and characters more than, the magic is fun and whatever, but I think you really see more fundamental, what's a good character, what makes a good person, how does he respond or she respond to this situation, and I think it works on a much more personal level, without getting caught up in those bigger questions, and it's just as fun in its way.
So this is a callback to the dragons discussion. I just want to throw that in there.
No problem.
So speaking of characters, let's get back to Children of the Fall. Well, actually, the whole series with Princess. Can you tell me, without giving away too much, about the character of Princess?
Okay. So Princess is she was. Her name's Kelly Ansen, and everyone calls her Princess, hence the title of the book. Mm. And Kelly is the daughter of one of the high-level executives of the Teledyne Corporations. She and her brother Scott were rescued right before a nuclear blast, where their father was working. And they were rescued by an Obsidian agent. And so Dad, Ansen Pringle was the name of their father. He knew that things were going south between the corporations. In fact, part of his story was creating this really heinous plan to take prisoners without the mental conditioning and loyalty type stuff, without any of the controls that Teledyne imposed on the prisoners when they turn them into specialists, give them the physical enhancements that the specialists have, and drop them into Obsidian territory and watch what happens. And it's a pretty insidious kind of plan, because it's basically, every one of those. I don't know if I need to go into it, but in the fallen world, one of the most important technologies is the ability to physically enhance people to make them basically super soldiers through nanites and that basically enhance the they give you stronger bones, stronger muscles, make you very physically very powerful, hard to hurt, hard to kill. And if you put criminals with that type of ability, and you take like 1,000 of those people and drop them into a territory that's otherwise in a law and order type of area, what's going to happen? It would be an interesting thing to see. So that was his plan. His plan was to do this. So he was up at a prison, starting to process these prisoners and turn them into these super soldiers. And that was because that was sort of his end game of how to end the wars between Teledyne and Obsidian. He figured, well, if we can, we're going to undermine Obsidian with this plan, and they'll never be able to recover. And he may or may not be right. We don't know. Before his plan could be enacted, the nukes dropped. And so that happened. But he knew something bad was going to happen. And so he decided he was going to take his 2 children and give them the physical enhancements that specialists and Obsidian agents got. And so here are these 2 kids. And this is not something that's done very often. I think there's one other character in the Fallen world that was given enhancements at a very young age. And that would be Aster in the Blue Salvation books. And so it's not the first time it happened, but it's one of the few times that it's been done. When you give kids enhancements, their reactions, the way they develop is a little bit different. But so anyway, so you have these 2. One Princess is 4 years old when the nukes drop. Her brother is 12, so he's significantly older, and so he basically raises her but he doesn't tell her anything about their father or the fact that they've been physically enhanced. He knows. He's old enough to know what's going on. And he even isolates her most of her life, subtly and not so subtly, just literally physically moving her up into the hills away from town so that she doesn't interact too much with people when she's growing up. And then the story of Princess is basically how she discovers who she really is and learns to both embrace and learn how to use her abilities, and learns who she is as a person. And the other 2 books kind of expand on that theme.
That's awesome. So, and so your main character is a female. Is that a challenge for you to write a female character, or no?
It was, because it wasn't to the extent that I grew up with 2 sisters and my mother raising me, so I kind of I've seen it. I know what girls say to each other when they think no one's listening. I kind of have a pretty good grasp on that perspective. I don't I don't ascribe to myself any special knowledge along those lines, but I think I grasped enough to be able to tell the story at least. And that was fun. That was a lot of fun. I think my favorite compliment was somebody asked if J.P. Chandler was a woman. So,
that is a good compliment considering, yeah. And Casey Ezell loves the character of Princess. No, that is a great compliment. And I guess that's the beauty of going with your initials too. It's like keeping guessing.
Yeah. Well, there's another story behind that, but that's but it worked out perfectly, and I realized that at the time. But the reason I went with JP was everybody knows me as James, and I will probably always be James or Jim to everyone.
Mm-hmm.
But the problem is that there is a Jim Chandler who writes genre fiction, and there's a James Chandler who writes legal thrillers.
Mm-hmm.
So I had to figure out.
I found both of them doing research on you.
Yeah. Yeah, so I had to. I think it was actually Chris. I was going to go with Jim Chandler for personal reasons, and Chris Kennedy pointed out, yeah, there's another guy already using that name, and it's just too tough to distinguish yourself when there's somebody with your same name. I think I've got a Facebook friend named James Chandler. So.
Oh, okay. Well, you've got fans, so everybody's looking forward to the next installment of Princess. Now, did you say this? Did you say this is going to be the final story for Princess, or?
I honestly don't know. It wraps up sort of the story arc that I started in They Call Me Princess, which happens. It basically happens about a year before the events of the first of the. As far as the timeline goes, there are basically two timelines to the Fallen World. One is right around the time of the fall itself, and the other is about 20 years later. So the Princess, They Call Me Princess, happens about 18 years after. I think it was exactly 18 years after the fall, and the Children of the Fall ends almost a year later. So it basically happens right before those events. There's been some discussion as to what happens next in the Fallen World as far as bigger stories, bringing some of these great stories together, these great timelines. Jamie Ibsen has a great story called Pacific Shogun that happens up in the Northwest, which isn't all that far from where Princess is. And there's some other, and now I think Casey Moore's book occurs in the Rocky Mountains. So just basically the other direction. I don't know exactly if they're going to keep going as far as expanding those storylines, but we'll see. This story arc finishes with Children of the Fall, but it really leaves the door open for more stories. So
awesome. All right, that's a nice teaser. Good job. So now, you have another job in addition to writing, right?
Yeah.
So how do you? And that's one thing I've noticed about a lot of the CKP writers. They're all very smart, intelligent, accomplished people who have full-time grown-up jobs and still find time to write. So how do you get it in? How do you do it?
It's not easy, honestly. I find that I do most of my writing on the weekends. In the evenings, I pick at stories a little bit here and there, and I will do plotting and research and things like that. I have, my job is sometimes very physical, so when I get home, I'm too tired to do a lot, and so I use my evenings to do the little things of writing that make the writing go faster when you actually sit down to write. I'm not a full-on plotter. I don't really outline my stories. I have a general picture in my mind of the whole story, of where I wanted to start, where I wanted to end, and sort of what happens in the middle. And I work through that, but I never sit down and write an outline. And honestly, the reason I tried to do that once upon a time, and the reason I just stopped bothering, because it was so much work. I was like, you know what? I might as well just start writing instead and get the words on paper and then change them later if I need to, rather than sit down and spend hours and hours writing an outline. It was just because I'm kind of a slow writer. I don't write fast. I try. I've tried, and sometimes I have sprints where I will put out thousands of words in a few days, and then I plod along for a while, because I tend to strain over every word. The words don't just flow. just how I've always been. So.
And do your sometimes, because I've heard this with other writers, do your characters kind of take over the writing for you? It's like, oh, they wouldn't do that, you know?
Yes and no. I've heard of people doing that. You know, you just have to be stern with them. You just have to say, no, that's not what you're doing right now. And you know, sometimes you have to sit them in the corner or whatever, you know, whatever it takes. You know, you gotta teach them to be good. You know, see, what I find where I find that happening most is in dialogue.
Mm-hmm.
The most fun I have writing is when I'm sitting down and I'm writing a scene and I know about what's going, and I know what's going on, and I know the characters really well, and then they start talking to each other, and I'm not sure where that conversation is necessarily going to go, and sometimes it goes into really interesting directions. Sometimes it's just funny as heck. One of my favorite scenes in They Call Me Princess is actually just a conversation between the character of Princess and Morgan Campbell, who, if you've read the books, becomes her love interest. So that's fun. But it's because you've got there's so much happening in this one little conversation. And there's probably a lot more going on than most of the readers even see, but it was so much fun to write. And so, yeah, I love that when that happens and you see, you know, I love writing action sequences. Action sequences are a lot of fun, but when you end up, when you're writing this, when you're writing the scene and you've got 3 or 4 different voices coming in and contributing, and they all have their distinct sound, they all have their distinct motivations, it becomes a really interesting event. And you know, you try to explain to yourself that no, these are all just different aspects of you talking. You're just talking to yourself, James, but it's not how it feels when it's happening.
Well, with that said, and Marisa kind of had the same thought that I had, where dominatrix of your character. Because I imagine when you first started that story, I was like, I could see you like talking to an imaginary child in the corner and just yelling, "Go! You're gonna sit here and you're gonna like it." And so thank you, Marisa. I
Marisa, what did you do? That's gonna get mean to death. I can see that.
Yeah. Let's see. Some more cogent thoughts here. Let's see. Dialogue is the most fun to write. Good dialogue is what makes a story and characters feel real. Yes. I agree.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's actually a really important writing point on that, because one of the most important things I ever learned about dialogue was when I first started writing, I'd write dialogue, and you know, the characters would be telling you exactly what you needed to hear. You know, they would take you exactly what needed to happen in that conversation. But then if you sit down in a cafe and listen to how people talk, or even, for heaven forbid, sit in court and listen to a judge and a couple of attorneys go back and forth, you see how conversations wander. They you know, even conversations that is supposed to be following a very specific track, they don't. They almost never do. I sat in court and watched, you know, arguments that are supposed to be on a very precise point go all over the map. So it's really a fun aspect of it, and that's what makes writing those things really enjoyable, is seeing where it can go. And I've had the experience where sitting down writing one of those conversations or meetings or whatever changes the story. Where it will suddenly, when you realize. I guess one of the best examples is you're sitting there and you're writing a meeting, for example, or which meeting scenes can be dreadful, because you have to get all this information out. Things have to happen. You have to have this meeting in the story. If you don't have it, you know, the rest of the story can't happen. But how do you write a meeting that's interesting? It can be a really tough challenge. But you can. So I've had the experience where I'm sitting there writing a meeting, and I realize that this character has to know this, and there's no way this intelligent character would not recognize this fact or this, or they wouldn't see, they wouldn't be stupid enough to miss this very obvious thing. And so their next reaction can't be what I had originally planned, because they're not that stupid. That kind of thing. So you have to change what you're going to do at least a little bit. And that's a, like I said, that's I love those moments, those aha moments, because that's really what it is. It's, oh yeah, that's where the story goes, and that's what has to happen. I like that. So
yeah, so, I could imagine that you're writing stuff. Oh damn, that's good. Oh shit.
Yeah. There goes that chapter.
Yeah. No, because I've heard that from other authors where they're writing, man, that's good. Like they wrote the line. It came from their brain or their muse or wherever it comes from. And they're like, oh man, that's really good. It changes everything. Shit.
Oh yeah. And it's a great, it's half the fun of writing, and you love it when it happens. And you know that when the readers aren't going to see all day, they're not going to experience that shift, but they're going to like the story that much better when they get there and when they get to that point.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons why I like doing these podcasts, is because you can. Oh, you're fine. You can do. You get these behind the scenes type things where it's like, well, we were going to go this direction, but then I thought of this, and now that doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah,
which is fun. So, what can we expect from you in the future? Now, as the immediate future is tomorrow, Children of the Fall comes out, and so go buy it, everyone. And before that, go buy the other 2 books. But after Children of the Fall, what can we expect to see from you in the future?
I'm currently working on a Four Horsemen universe novel. It was basically inspired by the Phoenix Protocol or the Phoenix Initiative. Sorry, and so I don't have a lot more to say about that right now, other than it starts in France. So I'm a bit of a Francophile, and I just felt that France had been neglected, and thought I'd have a little fun with that, because I could, because I can. And I already had an idea that I ran across the powers that be, and they seem to like it. So I'm gonna work with it a little bit and go from there.
All right. So you're in the midst of developing it, and then you got to pitch it. Is that?
Well, I'm already writing it.
Okay. So parlez-vous français?
Thank you, Marisa.
So parlez-vous français or no?
Yes. Yeah. I actually I studied France in high school, and I served my LDS mission in France. So.
Oh, awesome!
I'm pretty fluent.
So, sadly, I have 2 fluently French-speaking parents, and I almost flunked French in high school.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, and my dad is certified to teach French, and basically all I can do is what I just said. Curse and count and tell you that I don't speak French very well. That's about over my French.
That's all right. I actually I had a missionary companion who had been in France for a year, and that's about all he could do too.
So, and my accent is absolutely horrible.
Yeah, I don't brag about my accent. So
yeah. So, would you ever write since you speak French? I don't know how much you know about Louisiana. Would you ever write a Cajun character? I'll help you research.
Possibly. I think that'd be a lot of fun to get into that. I don't know that much about the Cajun the Cajun culture other than the food. So
well, you've got me and Yvonne, so we'll help you out.
Yeah, exactly. I know a few people, right?
Yeah, Yvonne Jacobs. Actually, she's a bit more well versed than I am. I was a house cat. She went out and experienced things. So,
well, I thought I think it was in a French class that I learned that Cajun actually came from Canadian.
Yeah, I caught you. So, but yeah, I can fake it. But
can you do the accent though?
Oh yeah, no, I can do the accent. Um, in fact, Casey wants me to do the accent for something. I forget. I'm not going to divulge too much about that, but um,
Secret projects.
yes, projects. Oh, con husband. Yeah, I thought you said something else. So, so you have a 4HU now. You like to write fantasy. We know you've got a epic fantasy hidden in a drawer somewhere. Are we gonna see any other maybe not necessarily epic fantasy or urban fantasy, anything like that that you want to do?
I'm actually while I'm working on my 4HU novel, I am looking. I'm hoping to develop my own universe. Haven't decided exactly which one. I've got so many ideas that I'm not sure. Haven't decided exactly which one. The one I'm leaning toward now is um, actually based off of a short story I did for the Onward LibertyCon
Mm-hmm.
anthology. It was basically this thing I threw together that had incorporated a lot of fairly deep ideas into a very short story, actually. And I think I think I'm going to develop that into kind of a space opera, free trader adventure type of story thing in space. So it's going to be really science fantasy as much as as much as anything, possibly space opera even. So
Awesome.
yeah.
So uh, like I said, and I'm gonna say it one more time. Go buy the books. First thing. Well, actually, if you want to stay up, depending on what coast you're on, stay up late and go buy the book at midnight.
That's
Uh,
right.
but uh, so where can people see you out in the wild? Where are you going to any conventions or appearances or anything?
Yeah, my convention schedule is severely restricted this year. I will be at LibertyCon,
Mm-hmm.
and so that's probably the only convention I'm going to be able to do this year. I might be able to make it to FactoryCon, though I'm not holding my breath on that.
Mm-hmm.
We'll see. I mean, if the book starts selling as well as I'd like, I'll probably be there. We'll see. Yeah, but yeah, that's it. Mostly, I'm going to try to plan some local events.
Mm-hmm.
Try to get to some local stuff here on the West Coast. But we'll see. Honestly, it's really about money and time.
Yeah.
So because I do have an adult job. So
Yeah. Yeah. That's the problem about pursuing your passions when you got to pay the bills. Um, no, but I really appreciate you coming on. But let's drive people to your website and sign up for your newsletter. Let's remind them of the promotion that you're doing on your website.
yes, so go to funfictionstories.com, and if you sign up for my sorry, if you sign up for my newsletter, you'll get a free ebook
Mhm.
of a short story, and you will also be entered to win a copy of all three hard copies of all three of the Princess books signed and delivered.
Awesome, awesome. And if the best way to communicate with you is what, Facebook or?
You can catch me on Facebook, but you can also send an email to Chandler, Chandlej at funfictionstories.com.
Awesome. And here's his Facebook. And before we go, I'm gonna promote our other podcast that we have is Future Books, which is brought to you by Shark Flight Media, which is our good buddy Ian Malone. He also does CKP Confidential for the Patreon folks, so go check that out. The latest one, I believe, had our good friends Melissa Olthoff and Nick Steverson, which you saw in the chat, arguing about dragons again. We're gonna have to have another dragon episode because they bitch and moan about it every episode. So we're gonna the fight's not over. Um,
We need
and
what we need to do is an episode about can your dragon beat my unicorn or something.
yes, yes, yeah. you need to come when we have another dragon episode. You need to come on and stir the pot a little bit. Just a little teaser. The CKP YouTube channel, we're going to be adding some different shows, some periodic shows, not a whole new podcast or anything like that, but some periodic shows that you're going to see in the future. So stay tuned for that. Nothing too definitive right now that I'm going to advertise, but I just want to tease that. And of course, we've got our associated YouTube channels. A little shameless nepotism here. Marisa Wolf, author on YouTube. Our good friend Casey Zell, Writer Life. We just posted a 2-part video, part one on CKP channel and part 2 on Casey's channel. Title being Peer Pressure Made Us Do It, and it's kind of how basically Casey arm wrestled a bunch of authors to become authors. So it's pretty fun. So go check that out on part 1 on CKP and part 2 on the Writer Life. Of course, we got Mark and Joy Wandry, World Maker Books. Go check them out. They're doing basically an audio version of some of Mark Wandry's older books. And so it's joy reading those. And I think they're in between books right now. I could be wrong. And they might be starting another book here pretty soon. And I believe that's it. And of course, go check everything. You can find James's book on chriskennedypublishing.com. And his book will be coming out tomorrow. And just in case, for a quick reference, here it is. Go check it out. And it sounds awesome, James. I do like post-apocalyptic stuff, even though I can't say it. But this sounds like a great series. Read the entire Fallen World universe, but you can start here and then catch up with everything else as well. And it comes out basically tonight at midnight. Do you know if that's East Coast, West Coast? What time zone at midnight?
Greenwich Mean Time, as far as I know.
All right then. All right then. And so James, I know this is. So, do you do many podcasts?
Not really. I've done a few things here and there. I've done a couple of readings, but
yeah. Well, you did great. You did great.
Thanks.
I really appreciate you coming on the show again. When we might put out a call for the Dragon part 2 episode. So if you want to come and start some shit, you're welcome.
I'd love to start some shit. That sounds like fun. Thanks for having me. This has been fun.
Yeah, and anytime you want to come on, you got something you want to promote, or you just want to shoot the breeze, we'll be glad to have you. And congratulations on another book coming out, and we look forward to reading it. And we'll catch everybody next time.
Thanks, Jeremy.
You're very welcome.